Welcome back to another installment of the Ultimate APUSH Review. Today we are taking a look at APUSH Period 4, which goes from 1800 to 1848, and today we got it reviewed for you. So real quick, the big ideas, really simplified. The role and relationship between the federal and state governments will continue to evolve during this time. So you're going to see this theme in today's presentation. 2, this era will experience a rapid economic, territorial, and demographic changes. The United States is going to be going through change in all three of those categories. Sectionalism will increase during this time. It's always been an issue. It's going to continue to be an issue in period 4. The new republic will both extend democratic rights and continue to struggle to define and extend democratic ideals to all Americans. Translation, some Americans are going to see the right to vote suddenly, and others are going to continue to be denied that. And then finally, various reform movements will seek to change American society. So let's take a look. Kind of one of the important points you're going to see is America is expanding its territory. The size of the United States is going to more than double during this period. In fact, the U.S. will attempt to increase our foreign trade, expand our borders, and at the same time, especially after the War of 1812, attempt to isolate ourselves from foreign affairs. This will make way more sense in just a moment. So let's take a look. If you look at a map of America in 1790, the population density was kind of hugging along the Atlantic seaboard. And you see this change because by 1830, the population is moving west. You know, you still got these population centers like Boston and Philadelphia, but people are moving west with increasing frequency. And there's a lot of different reasons for it. One, the population's growing through natural population growth. Birth rate is allowing the population of the United States to increase. You also have this huge amount of immigration coming, especially around 1830 and especially 1840. The number of immigrants increase, and the people who are coming are different. The number one group is the Irish, number two is the Germans, and then number three are English immigrants as well as others. Transportation improvements allow this western expansion to take place as well. You know, we have this transportation revolution with canal building, the first national road, the Cumberland Road, and eventually, of course, the big one, railroads in the 1830s and 40s. So transportation improvements allow this western expansion. And then with Eli Whitney's cotton gin, invented in the 1790s, cotton production is going to increase. And Southerners are looking for more and more land, and with the increase of cotton production, unfortunately, goes the increase of slavery. And it's going to be moving west into places like Alabama and Mississippi and Missouri. Other reasons for this western expansion are threats are removed from the continent. And for instance, Napoleon was kind of hoping to create a French empire once again on the North American continent, but that all goes, disappears because in 1803, Jefferson gets the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the U.S. without having to go to war. Remember in the War of 1812, once again, England and us, round 2, we fight. And we are able to fight to a stalemate. We don't defeat England, but we stand up to them again, and we get those British forts that had been kind of hanging out since the Treaty of Paris after the American Revolution. We get rid of those once and for all. And then in 1819, we reach a deal with Spain, the Adams-Onis Treaty, where Spain agrees to sell us Florida. So we're able to move west, our boundaries are expanding, and of course the sad reality, this is going to take place as a result of many Native American defeats. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. In fact, right now. So if you look at a map, this is kind of roughly land lost by Native people up until 1783, and that same land by around 1850. It's a rapid decline in the amount of native land. And there's a whole bunch of events, and we'll kind of briefly highlight a few of the key ones for APUSH Period 4. And one, the Battle of Tippecanoe. Tecumseh is defeated by William Henry Harrison just before the War of 1812. You have the First Seminole War, which takes place in 1816, 1818, where the natives once again are defeated. And tragic events surrounding the Indian Removal Act, the ignoring of the Supreme Court by Andrew Jackson, and of course, finally, the Trail of Tears, where the so-called 5 civilized tribes will be removed from the territory. Now, a couple of kind of things to keep in mind. Remember, in this period, you also have this struggle for neutrality. Even before 1800, Washington, Adams had been trying to stay neutral from the war, the Napoleonic Wars. And we had the Chesapeake Leopard Affair in 1807, where England attacks our ship, the Chesapeake. We have the Embargo Act, which is a big epic failure. You can't trade with anybody. And it's replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act, where in 1809, and eventually Macon's Bill number 2, which all of those are unable to really preserve American neutrality, which leads eventually to the War of 1812. And there's a lot of reasons why we have the War of 1812. You know, we want to defend our neutrality from impressment. We want to defend our national honor. There's also those continued forts on U.S. soil. Tecumseh and his brother are being supplied by the British with guns, which are then being used against Americans on the frontier. And of course, some of those war hawks like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun are talking about, why don't we expand our territory and take Canada? And eventually we have the War of 1812 under James Madison, which leads eventually to the Treaty of Ghent, and all is settled once again between us and our former mother country. Key concept in the APUSH standards: the U.S. will seek to expand its global presence by focusing its expansion on the North American continent and continuing to promote foreign trade. So kind of some highlights for this is, of course, the Louisiana Purchase, already mentioned. Jefferson goes to war rather than pay tribute to the Barbary pirates. He goes to war, uses the Navy, which he criticized under Adams, to fight the Barbary pirates. The War of 1812 preserves our neutrality. The Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1807, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams helps negotiate an agreement where England and the U.S. agree to disarm the Great Lakes region, possibly preventing a war. The British-American Convention in 1818 is a joint agreement between the U.S. and England, where we agree we will jointly occupy Oregon for 10 years. The northern boundary of the Louisiana Territory will be set at the 49th parallel, and we'll agree to go on some nice fishing trips in the Newfoundland region. We'll share that section for fishing. Adams-Onis Treaty will buy Florida from Spain. Monroe Doctrine of 1823, we basically tell Europe, stay the heck out of the Western Hemisphere, no more colonies, we won't intervene in your affairs, you stay the heck out of ours. No way we could enforce it, but England was down with it, so they never really test the Monroe Doctrine. The Lone Star Republic is established in 1836. Texans kind of declared their independence from Mexico, causes all sorts of controversy. No one wants to annex Texas because of the whole issue of slavery. So Texas will be its own country for a brief period. Things we'll cover in period 5, but actually fall in the framework of period 4, the election of Polk, Manifest Destiny, Oregon, Texas, and of course the biggie, the Mexican-American War. But we'll cover that next time. Kind of one of the key ideas happening during this time period as well is the rise of nationalism. And really you see cultural nationalism, where patriotic themes can be seen in art, literature, and other forms. So you have the Hudson River School, where people are painting these landscape paintings of the Hudson River Valley, celebrating the natural beauty of the North American continent. You have men like John James Audubon studying the birds of North America. So you have all this kind of cultural nationalism after the War of 1812. Economic nationalism can best be seen in the American System by Henry Clay, where he talks about the need for the Second Bank of the United States. It's reestablished, rechartered in 1816. You have the protective tariff, where the tariff's goal was to protect American industry and also help fund transportation improvements, which is the third part of the American system. So this idea of developing the economy of the United States. Political nationalism, we can also see there's only one political party after the war. It is the Democratic Republican Party, the Federalists were already kind of fading away. The Hartford Convention hurts them, and you have one political party. And we get this called the era of good feelings. And they do adopt some Federalist ideas. Even before this time period, the Republicans were adopting some Federalist ideas, but there still will be disputes over things like the tariff and slavery, the bank. So it's not exactly all good feelings. Politics between these 1800 to 1848. Of course, you have the election of 1800, the first peaceful transition of power with the election of Jefferson, the era of good feelings. Kind of the election of Monroe is kind of seen as the start, and it kind of starts to fall apart after the Panic of 1819. One political party, Federalists are gone. Of course, not all good feelings, because there are factions within the Republican Party. They have disagreements over issues like slavery and tariffs, and all of it will kind of just crumble with the election of 1824 and the so-called corrupt bargain, when John Quincy Adams becomes president following a disputed election, and suddenly Henry Clay becomes Secretary of State, and you have this period of political tension. All throughout this period, historians have kind of pointed it out as the age of the common man, as new state laws are passed which allow for more white men to vote. And so property requirements are done away with. And so you have this huge increase in the number of people participating in the electoral process. And of course, in 1828, you get the election of Andrew Jackson in a rematch against John Quincy Adams. And during Jackson's presidency, you have the rise of the second two-party system, where under Andrew Jackson, the Democrats versus the Whigs. And the Whigs are going to be the opponents of Andrew Jackson. As you can see on this map, kind of reviewing really quickly the political kind of developments during this time period, the Revolution of 1800, the election of Jefferson, Hartford Convention, the moment the Federalists kind of put the final nail into their coffin, followed by the era of good feelings, one political party. They are all Republicans. Of course, that's not exactly completely true. It is a simplified version, then the corrupt bargain, and then eventually you get the Democratic Party, which are similar to the old school Democratic Republicans, and the Whig Party, which have a lot of similarities to the Federalists in terms of their beliefs.
Denied.
There are going to be people who are denied or left out of this new national culture. In fact, women are going to see their roles restricted. There's this idea of the cult of the domesticity. A woman's place was in the domestic sphere. Of course, as the nation became a republic, there was this idea of Republican motherhood, where women should raise good citizens to be active in the democratic process, especially their young sons. And a big historic event takes place in 1848 when you have at Seneca Falls the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments, where women outline their grievances towards the country and demand full equal rights. For African Americans, we're going to take a look at them a little bit more closely in a moment, but you're going to see the rise of the pro-slavery arguments, racism in both the North and the South, and the complete exclusion of African Americans from this national culture. And Native people, once again, Native resistance will be met by force removal by the government of the United States. Big idea in this period as we move west, it's essential you understand the rise of sectionalism. In spite of this increase in nationalism, sectionalism will continue to plague the nation. You're going to have the Northeast, the North, the West, and the South, and they're going to all pursue their own kind of agendas. In fact, state governments at this time will also resist the authority of the federal government. And you can see that in two great examples. The North, at the Hartford Convention in 1814, New England Federalists are going to consider possible secession due to their anger and resentment about the War of 1812. However, the war was over by the time their plot comes to the surface and the Federalists fade away. Kind of more significant is what happens in the South with the nullification crisis. In 1828 to 1832, South Carolina votes to nullify the Tariff of 1828 and 1832, creating a serious problem, and Jackson, as the president, orders federal troops, and eventually you get the Compromise Tariff of 1833, also known as the olive branch and the sword. So state governments are going to be resisting the federal government at times. And once again, that idea of sectionalism, so important. In spite of this increase in nationalism, sectionalism will continue to plague the nation. We've seen some of these examples, but quick review: the Second Bank of the United States, supported by the North, opposed by the South. Internal transportation improvements, heavily favored by the West, but state rights supporters opposed the spending of federal money on internal improvements. Protective Tariff of 1816 is going to be supported by Northern manufacturers, resisted by Southerners very often. The Missouri issue is going to be a hugely complicated sectional crisis because it's going to divide the North and the South. Should slavery expand into new states? And it's temporarily going to be solved by the Missouri Compromise, where they make Missouri a slave state, Maine a free state, and they cut off slavery north of 3630. The nullification issue we've already mentioned, where South Carolina is going to resist the tariff of 1828, and other southern states are going to kind of morally support South Carolina. And Andrew Jackson, of course, is going to respond with the olive branch and the sword. And then, of course, a big problem is going to happen with the national bank debate, where Jackson is going to veto the rechartering of the bank, and you're going to have the rise of pet banks. This is going to be an issue that's going to also, to some degree, divide Northerners and Southerners. In spite of this sectionalism, though, you see this commitment to the Union. In fact, when Daniel Webster and Robert Hayne debate in 1830, it is Daniel Webster who rejects the idea that a state could defy or leave the Union. Andrew Jackson also rejects that when he puts the smackdown on South Carolina during the nullification crisis in 1832. So there is this commitment to the Union, but there is sectional tension. In spite of this kind of effort by states and different sections of the country to kind of pursue their goals, the Supreme Court will increase the power of the federal government during this time. We saw it, John Marshall, kind of the Federalist judge, Marbury versus Madison, the importance of judicial review. They established that precedent. McCulloch versus Maryland, the court rules the Second Bank of the U.S. is constitutional, therefore saying the federal government can create the bank. And another case, Gibbons versus Ogden, states do not regulate interstate commerce, trade between states, the federal government does. So all of these different cases during John Marshall's tenure as the Chief Justice are going to further the power of the federal government. Regional sectional identity of the South, a couple things you should keep in mind. The cotton gin is invented in 1793. It's going to transform cotton production. Slave ownership was a sign of status, and in the South you have the kind of rise of this aristocratic plantation class. Those people had the wealth. The majority of Southerners did not own slaves, yet supported the institution of slavery. Only about 25% of Southerners actually owned any slaves at all, but there was this hope of one day they themselves would own slaves as well. They have this code of chivalry in the South, this strong sense of honor amongst Southerners, and as Northerners became critical of slavery and slave revolts were taking place, Southerners became very defensive of the institution of slavery. In fact, you see George Fitzhugh defending slavery as a positive good. It was better than the factory labor in the North, and in some instances, you see the use of religion to defend slavery. Amongst African Americans, the experiences were mixed depending upon where they were, but life under slavery sucked no matter who you were. Slaves relied on extended or surrogate families to kind of maintain emotional bonds with one another, to resist the inhumanity of slavery. During the Second Great Awakening, there's the importance of the slave spiritual, slave music, and religion. Many slaves during the First and Second Great Awakening take on Christianity, like becoming Methodists, and the importance of fusing African religions with Christianity, and you get these kind of hybrid faiths. Slave resistance plays a key role. You're going to have all sorts of different ways that slaves are going to show their unhappiness with the institution: sabotage, destroying things, destroying tools, running away, work slowdowns, and the most obvious one is going to be rebellions. And Denmark Vesey is an example. In 1822 in Virginia, his rebellion is going to be betrayed, and he is, along with his supporters, are going to be killed before the rebellion can take place. Nat Turner is going to have some luck. In 1831, he is going to rebel. Unfortunately for Nat Turner and his followers, after the rebellion takes place, eventually they are captured and killed as well. And these rebellions and the threat of rebellions leave southern states to pass stricter slave codes. There is going to be a growing abolitionist movement in the North. There is going to be a free black population in the North and the South, with severe restrictions on them in both places. And you're going to get individuals like David Walker, his famous appeal to the colored citizens of the world in 1829, basically talking about the importance of fighting back against the inhumanity of slavery. Other abolitionist movements, the American Colonization Society, their whole plan was to eventually slowly free slaves and send freed slaves to Africa. You also get individuals like William Lloyd Garrison, the American Anti-Slavery Society he creates, calling for immediate, uncompensated emancipation in his famous newspaper, The Liberator. And a lot of other individuals, such as Frederick Douglass, and so on. There's also going to be a unique regional identity of the North. While the South is relying on Southern agriculture and especially slave labor, you're going to see the rise of manufacturing in the North. Samuel Slater, known as the father of the factory system, the growth of cities. Eli Whitney's interchangeable parts allows for mass production in factories. The steam engine, developed by Robert Fulton with the Clermont, allows for transportation costs to be cheaper. The Lowell factory system in Lowell, Massachusetts, worked by New England farm daughters, later Irish immigrants. All of this is kind of changing the economy of the North. You have the court case Commonwealth versus Hunt, where the state Supreme Court rules that labor unions are allowed. And as a result of these opportunities in the factory system, immigrants are coming into the U.S., the Irish, the Germans, the English, and every other group that was coming, and they tended to settle in the North or in the Midwest farm regions. And you get these immigrants coming in, and of course with that you see the rise of nativist groups, such as the Know Nothing Party, who is anti-immigrant, especially Irish immigrant. Keep in mind, although these two regions are developing unique characteristics, the economic activities of the South and North were linked together. Southern cotton provided the raw material for manufacturing in the Northeast. And also, closing out, in this period of time, you have the Second Great Awakening take place, Charles Finney and the religious revivalism, this idea of spiritual reform from within. And these awakenings are sweeping the frontier, and huge number of conversions and religious revivalism. But also during this time period, you have various social reform movements. You have the temperance movement, the American Temperance Society trying to get people to stop drinking. You have prison reform by Dorothea Dix. You have the abolitionist movement, people like Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, David Walker, and many, many others. You have women's rights movement, Seneca Falls we've seen, education in the North in Massachusetts with Horace Mann, and a whole bunch of utopian societies, some religious, such as the Mormons and the Shakers, others like Brook Farm, where they're trying to create these model idealistic communities to reform society. Alright everybody, that's going to do it today. Passing APUSH is hard work. Hopefully this video on period 4 made it just a little bit easier. And if you're confused with anything, post a comment. If you thought the video helped you out even just a little bit, hit that little thumbs up guy. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to Jocz Productions. We're always making new videos and we love the support. And if after a long day of studying for APUSH you find yourself looking like this, take a break, go look at some blue skies, and have a beautiful day. Peace.